So let's continue our review here of the Group Policy Management Console back on our computer dc.company.pri, where we want to take a look at the process of backing up, of importing, of copying, and also of restoring GPOs. And I really want to show you how this can be accomplished here in the GPMC. I also want to show you the 4 different equivalent commandlets in PowerShell that will allow you to do the same thing. Let's start first with just a review of the facts as it's associated with configuring settings here in group policy. Now, we've talked already before about when you come down here to work with any group policy, that anytime you go and configure a policy or an administrative template or any of the settings that we've worked with thus so far, when you go about enabling and then configuring that policy, like this one here, the enabling and the configuring is automatically turned on and functioning the moment that you hit the OK button down here in the bottom. So there is really no sense of a save or a save as button here with group policy objects. A setting, once configured, is automatically active. And so there's really no way to quote unquote revert a GPO without going back into the setting and then configuring it for not configured. This gets particularly challenging too a little later on when we start talking about preferences, because unlike those managed GPOs where when you remove the setting can be removed from machines, preferences don't behave in that way. Once you assign a preference and it starts to be received by different computers in an organizational unit, well, that preference is going to be configured. And the only way to back it out is to create a reverse preference to remove whatever it is that you did. Now, I should mention also that if you need to add this sense of versioning into group policy, there is a tool called the MDOT, the Microsoft Desktop Optimization Pack, which I believe is a no-cost tool. I believe it's a for-cost tool that you can download from Microsoft. You'll have to have some licensing for it, but built into that solution is a tool that will allow you to do some sense of GPO versioning. But again, that is a topic for another day. That is a completely different tool, not necessarily relevant here for the 70-411. Now, the tools that we do have here in the Group Policy Management Console start with the abilities to just back up your GPOs. So let's talk first here about some of the tools that exist. If I right-click here on the Group Policy Objects node here in the tree, I can choose to back up these different GPOs that exist. Let's say, for example, that I want to create a backup of those GPOs. I could come here to Browse and then identify a location, perhaps down here on the E drive, where let me create a folder here called GPO Backup. And inside that folder here, we'll just go about creating a backup of our GPOs. So GPO Backup and then today's date. If I hit the backup button here, you'll notice that this process doesn't take very long, because essentially you're just backing up a series of metadata. So this is really kind of a text file that we're dealing with here. And in fact, if I come down here, we can actually take a look at just the contents of what we just backed up right here in the GPO backup folder. Now, the information you see here is not really designed to be human readable. In fact, the GUIDs that you're seeing here don't even really correspond with the GUIDs that you would find otherwise in the sysvol. If I come back here and take a look at policies and then the location right here, you'll notice that the GUIDs over here in the backup do not exactly correspond with the usual GUIDs that we think of for those GPOs here in the sysfile itself. And so for that reason, the best way, or really the way to go about restoring these GPOs starts by finding the appropriate location right up here in the path to go about actually restoring the backups. So let's go ahead and restore those backups then from their existing location. Now you'll notice here that here in the backup location, this is eGPO backup, where you can find the GUIDs that are associated with each of the different group policy objects that we've backed up. These are all the ones that exist in that location. And I could, if I wanted here, just choose one, for example, the, BitLocker encryption one, and choose to restore that to go about restoring it from backup. Now, none of this should be particularly interesting. I mean, we've all done backups and recoveries before, but there are a couple of other features that I want to show you here, in addition to what we see here in the Managed Settings view, so that you can go about actually doing things like imports and copies of GPOs. Let me come down here and drop open the GPOs view here, and just select again that Enable BitLocker Encryption GPO from before. Let's assume, for example, that we have a series of backed up GPOs, all of which you have settings, that we want to actually import in those settings into this existing GPO. If I right-click here, I can choose to import settings from some other location. Now, the important part here is that this process actually will overwrite the existing settings in this GPO with those that exist in whatever GPO we're restoring from. As you'll notice, importing in those settings does not modify the other attributes of the GPO like security filtering and delegation links and WMI filters. These are all contained within Active Directory itself. All those configurations are over there in AD and in its database, as opposed to the contents that exist in the sysvol, which is what we're dealing with here. So if I choose next here and determine whether or not I want to create an additional backup of this GPO before I override its settings, I can do so. I can also here identify what that backup location would be and then what the source GPO would be that would overwrite the settings, the content here of this GPO we're looking at. Again, also not terribly interesting, but this provides a way for you to take an existing GPO and then overwrite its settings with the contents from some other GPO in some other location. You can also, if I come back here, if you right-click again on a GPO, choose to copy that GPO, which is a process, just like you would expect, that copies this GPO and creates another GPO here in the list of group policy objects. So we could copy it, we could paste it, and create another same exact copy, just like we would with a file or folder. So again, there's nothing terrifically earth-shattering here, but these different functionalities provide you a way to either ensure that you've got some kind of backup of that GPO, or also transfer them around or make copies of them should you need to apply them into different locations. As you might imagine, in a situation where an object can only be in a single organizational unit at once, it can occasionally come in handy to go about copying and recreating some of these GPOs with slightly different settings so that you can tune those settings for the machines or users that may exist in different organizational units. Now, I do just want to show you here, if I right-click and choose to run as administrator, that there are some equivalent commandlets here in PowerShell that I think you should probably get to know. Those commandlets here are the backup GPO commandlet. There's backup GPO, and the usual just parameters associated with backing up a GPO, what your domain and server and the GUID would be for that GPO. Also, there is the restore GPO commandlet. So restore GPO. Restore does just the opposite of backup. There is the import GPO commandlet right here, import GPO commandlet. This import GPO commandlet, as you can see here, can make use of a migration table, which is a topic we'll talk about next, that will automatically translate the old values into the new values so that they correspond with whatever objects exist here in this target domain. And then lastly, if I come back here one more time, then there is the copy GPO commandlet. So those are the four commandlets I would be aware of. I would also, in fact, just while we're here, let me show you one more commandlet that's pretty cool called get GPO Report, that can provide you a single list, an HTML document that gives you all the information, the statistics, the values, the settings themselves that correspond with one or more GPOs in your organization. I find this particularly useful also if I can create a report here of type HTML and then set the path to, I don't know, C users, G Shields desktop report.html. That can actually create a very nice little HTML report that will provide all the contents of a GPO in those rare circumstances where any of this information that we're dealing with here, for some reason, doesn't make its way into the backups appropriately, or for some reason doesn't restore from backup correctly. Let me see if I can get access to that file that we just created. So C users, G Shields, desktop right there. Oops, looks like I copied it to the wrong profile. And if we take a look at the HTML report that we created and enable the blocked content, this will give you, for every single one of the GPOs in your domain, a document that you can store in some location, if you should so choose, with all of the different configurations. I find this document, in some cases, to be actually more handy than even setting up any kind of backup and recovery of those GPOs, because the document is human readable, whereas the backed up GPO objects, as you saw, are perhaps a little less so.